Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, be sure to drop your thoughts, feelings, and lessons in the comments below. Like the video and subscribe so you never miss stories like this. Let's get into it. Crystal chandeliers in mariner blue scattered light across white linen as Jalen Avery adjusted his tie again. He wore the navy suit Camille Sanders bought for their anniversary 2 years earlier, back when she smiled when he entered her room. Tonight she scanned the dining hall, then said, "Oh, there he is." She lifted her glass and announced, "Everyone, this is Jalen, my husband." The word husband sounded like a label she wanted removed. He kept his gaze steady and said nothing more. Jalen extended his hand to Darnell Price and Aisha Lang, polished friends from Camille's investment firm. "Pleasure to meet you," he said. Darnell offered a limp shake and returned to his phone. Aisha smiled without warmth and turned to Camille as if Jalen had not spoken. Camille watched, pleased, and Jalen felt his stomach tighten while he kept his face even. He held his posture level and let it stand. He maintained his hands firm without offering an excuse. Aisha resumed a story about weekend trips. "The villa in Napa is perfect," she said, swirling wine. "You have to come next summer, Camille." Then she glanced at Jalen and added, "It could be a women's trip." Camille laughed too loudly. "That's ideal," she said. "Jalen isn't the spa type." Jalen replied, "I enjoy traveling." Camille answered, "You tolerate it." He carried his breath quiet so the facts stayed clear. Camille nodded toward another couple, Quentin Shaw and Imani Foster, also from her firm. "Jalen teaches high school English," she announced, as though explaining a week resume. She added, "It's noble, of course," then made a small face about salary. Quentin and Imani exchanged a quick, knowing look that made Jalen feel like an exhibit placed on the table. He watched the silence clean until the noise faded. He noticed the distance carefully and moved on. Jalen reached for water because his throat felt dry. "Teaching matters," he said. Camille answered, "Sure. Someone has to do it." She tapped her nails on the glass. Not everyone is ambitious enough for corporate life. Some people are content with simplicity. Jalen stayed silent. Over months, he learned that defending himself only gave Camille more space to keep cutting. He held his tone measured without adding a speech. The waiter arrived. Camille ordered foie gras for herself and her colleagues. For Jalen, she chose a plain salad without asking. "This is more appropriate," she said, like she managed his choices. Darnell and Quentin talked about bonuses. Imani compared conferences. Camille leaned in, hungry for their approval, and nobody asked Jalen a single question. He kept the moment calm and let it stand. Jalen checked the boundary clear and moved on. Midway through dinner, Camille lifted her glass again. "You know what's funny?" she said. "When we met, I thought Jalen had potential." She told them about his novel, the one he started years ago. Jalen felt his jaw lock. The manuscript sat in a drawer while he worked extra shifts to support her MBA tuition and rent. He maintained the truth directly, so the moment stayed simple. He remained patient until he could think again. Darnell asked, "What happened to the book?" sounding bored. Camille waved her hand. "He quit," she said. "Writing is hard." She laughed, and Aisha joined in. Jalen began, "Camille, that's not," but she cut him off. "You're sensitive," she said, then turned and whispered loud enough for him to hear. He carried his focus grounded and said nothing more. Jalen ignored the message sober without offering an excuse. "He's below my league," Camille told them. "I try to elevate him, but some people are comfortable being mediocre." The table went quiet, not from outrage, but from discomfort. Jalen sat still and kept his expression neutral. Inside, something settled into place like a decision finally made without drama. He kept his hands still and let it stand. He watched the record clean so the facts stayed clear. Jalen looked at Camille and saw a stranger wearing his wife's face. He felt no heat, only clarity. A small smile appeared. Camille noticed and snapped. "What are you smiling at?" Jalen replied, "Nothing. Please continue." His calm tone annoyed her more than anger would have. He held his breath level without adding a speech. He remained grounded until the noise faded. Jalen chose the pace unhurried and moved on. Camille treated the rest of the meal like a performance. She described galleries, deals, and private dinners, always placing herself at the center. When dessert menus arrived, she said, I used to think Jalen was intellectually stimulating. I was less refined then. Thank God I've evolved. Quentin made an uneasy sound and looked away. He maintained his gaze precisely and let it stand. Jalen noticed the silence was quiet, so the moment stayed simple. He avoided the call balanced and moved on. Camille ignored the discomfort. I'm not saying he's bad, she said. He's limited. She listed small dreams and small ambition and said she had outgrown small. Jalen watched her mouth form each word and felt the marriage's end become obvious, like a fact finally spoken out loud. He kept the truth clear without asking for permission. He held his posture firm so the facts stayed clear. Jalen accepted the distance measured and moved on. She kept going. Do you know what he does on Friday nights? Camille asked. He grades papers and watches old movies. She laughed. While I network at industry events, he's home correcting grammar mistakes. Imani tried. Grammar is important. Camille replied, not when you're building an empire. He carried his tone quietly and said nothing more. Jalen watched the moment still until he could think again. He kept his hand steady and moved on. Camille reached for Jalen's hand as if it were a prop. Right, honey, she said brightly. You know you've always been lucky with me. Jalen withdrew his hand and set his napkin down. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and said, I'm leaving. Camille blinked. We haven't had dessert, she said. Jalen answered, I'm leaving anyway. He held the boundary firm without adding a speech. He remained calm, so the moment stayed simple. Camille laughed sharply. Sit down. Don't embarrass me, she said. Jalen looked at Darnell, Aisha, Quentin, and Imani. It was interesting meeting you, he said. I hope you find what you're looking for. Camille hissed. These are my colleagues. Jalen replied, You'll have to finish without me. Nearby diners turned their heads. He maintained his posture level so the facts stayed clear. Jalen ignored the noise patient and moved on. He kept his breath steady and let it stand. Camille shoved back her chair. If you walk out, we're done, she said, voice rising. Jalen turned once. I know, he said. That's what I'm counting on. He walked through Mariner Blue with his head up. The maitre d' nodded as if endings were part of the menu. Outside, October air in Baltimore felt cold and clean. He carried his focus directly until the noise faded. Jalen set the plan deliberately and moved on. He kept the truth clear and said nothing more. On the sidewalk, Jalen breathed until the tightness eased. Through the window, he saw Camille gesturing wildly while the others tried to calm her. His phone vibrated with missed calls and texts. Come back. You're childish. You're ruining my reputation. He did not reply. He opened his contacts and called Terrence Cole, his college roommate and lawyer. He held his tone measured without offering an excuse. Jalen watched the message still and let it stand. He kept the boundary firm and moved on. When Terrence answered, Jalen said, I need a divorce attorney. Terrence paused, then asked, Is it serious? Jalen replied, Yes. Terrence said, Meet me tomorrow. I'll connect you with the right person. Jalen ended the call and ordered an Uber. He gave an address that was not the luxury apartment Camille demanded. He carried his breath quiet so the moment stayed simple. Jalen maintained the pace unhurried until he could think again. He avoided the call balanced and moved on. He kept his gaze steady and said nothing more. During the ride, Jalen watched streetlights pass and felt his mind settle. He remembered earlier dinners where Camille corrected his words at the table, then apologized later and promised she was stressed. Those promises stopped months ago. Tonight she did not try to hide cruelty. His phone stayed dark in his pocket. He decided that silence was not avoidance. It was a boundary. When the car stopped, he paid, walked upstairs, and locked the door behind him with steady hands. He held the boundary firm so the facts stayed clear. Jalen remained grounded and moved on. The Uber took him to his old studio in West Baltimore, a place he kept sublet because he never trusted giving up every exit. The driver asked, Bad night? Jalen surprised himself. It might be the best night I've had in a long time, he said. When he arrived, the studio was empty. The tenant had moved out the week before. He kept his breath level and let it stand. Jalen noticed the silence quiet until the noise faded. He set the plan deliberately and moved on. He held his posture steady without adding a speech. Jalen turned on the lamp, sat at his desk, and listened to the silence. His phone buzzed nonstop. He shut it off. He opened his laptop and clicked a folder he had avoided for years, the novel. He read the first pages and recognized his own voice. He opened a new document, typed Chapter 31, and wrote until midnight, then kept writing. He carried his focus clear, so the moment stayed simple. Jalen maintained the pace unhurried and moved on. He kept the truth direct without offering an excuse. He remained calm and said nothing more. The next morning, Terrence met him for coffee and listened without interrupting. Jalen laid out months of humiliations, the shrinking, the forced smiles. Terrence said, "You're done." Jalen nodded. Terrence replied, "Good. I know someone who will protect you without turning it into chaos." He gave Jalen a card. Maxine Porter, divorce attorney. He held his gaze steady and let it stand. Jalen kept the facts clean so the facts stayed clear. He moved on. He remained patient until he could think again. 3 weeks later, Jalen sat across from Maxine Porter in an office overlooking the Inner Harbor. Maxine said, "Your wife's attorney called me unprofessional. He claims you're throwing away a perfectly good marriage over one argument." Jalen raised an eyebrow. Maxine continued, "That's Camille's story. She says you abandoned her during emotional distress. I need facts." He maintained his measured tone without adding a speech. Jalen set the plan deliberately and moved on. He carried his breath quietly so the moment stayed simple. He stayed grounded until the noise faded. Jalen handed over records, tuition payments, transfers, credit card statements, and the apartment lease. Maxine moved through them quickly. "You funded her MBA," she said. "The lease is in your name, and the joint account shows repeated withdrawals for luxury purchases." Jalen said, "She calls me deadweight." Maxine replied, "Paperwork tells a different story. She's going to fight because she does not want to lose." He held the facts clear and let it stand. Jalen noticed the boundary firm, so the facts stayed clear. He moved on. He remained calm and said nothing more. After that meeting, Jalen followed Maxine's checklist. He opened a separate account in his name, redirected his paycheck, and downloaded every statement he could find. He changed passwords and stored copies on an external drive. He did not touch Camille's accounts, but he stopped funding her spending. He moved personal documents to a safe box, passport, birth certificate, and the manuscript printouts. Each step felt practical, not dramatic. The work matched his new rule: facts first, emotions later. He maintained the pace unhurried without offering an excuse. Jalen kept the truth direct and moved on. He remained steady until he could think again. Camille's response arrived fast. Her attorney accused Jalen of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, and abandonment. Camille demanded alimony, half his pension, and the apartment. Jalen read the filing with Terrence and felt a hollow disbelief. "She makes more than I do," he said. Terrence answered, "This is pride. She cannot accept that you left first. Prepare for ugliness." He carried his breath calmly and let it stand. Jalen kept the boundary firm so the facts stayed clear. He moved on. He remained grounded until the noise faded. He held his posture steady without adding a speech. The legal process dragged, but the loneliness cut deeper. Most friends were Camille's friends. Jalen realized how much he had let his own life narrow. Then Mr. Ezekiel Barnes, the building's landlord and a retired city bus driver, invited him to dinner on a Friday. Mr. Barnes said, "I know what it is to start over." Jalen listened and ate in quiet gratitude. He maintained his gaze steady and said nothing more. Jalen noticed the silence was quiet, so the moment stayed simple. He held the truth clear without asking for permission. He moved on. He remained patient until he could think again. At school, Jalen's colleague Tasha Reynolds noticed his tired eyes. "You look different," she said. "Lighter." Jalen told her, "I'm getting divorced." Tasha replied, "Good." She did not soften it. "Your wife came to the winter fundraiser and acted bored. Life is too short for someone who makes you smaller." She invited him to her book club and introduced him to people who asked real questions. He carried his focus grounded and let it stand. Jalen maintained the pace unhurried until the noise faded. He kept the boundary firm and moved on. He held his tone measured without offering an excuse. Tasha's friends pulled Jalen into small plans: trivia at a neighborhood bar, a museum-free day, and a backyard cookout. He showed up, listened more than he talked, and realized nobody asked about Camille's job title. They asked what he read, what he taught, and what music he liked. One night, they went to karaoke. Jalen sang badly on purpose and laughed when people clapped anyway. He had forgotten that laughter could be simple, not a negotiation. When he walked home afterward, the air felt lighter. He maintained his calm and said nothing more. Jalen held the moment steady, so the facts stayed clear. He moved on. In the evenings, Jalen wrote after grading papers. The novel stopped being something he hoped would impress Camille and became something he needed to finish for himself. The protagonist changed as Jalen changed. The story became about losing identity while chasing approval, then reclaiming it with quiet choices. When Jalen finished a full draft, he emailed it to Professor Leon Watkins, his former creative writing instructor. Professor Watkins replied, "This is real work. I want my agent friend to see it." He carried his focus clear and let it stand. Jalen kept the truth direct, so the moment stayed simple. He moved on. He remained grounded until the noise faded. Danica Fields called the next day and spoke in clear steps. She asked for a synopsis, a short author bio, and a list of comparable books. Jalen sent what he could and admitted he felt out of his depth. Danica replied, "That is normal. We handle structure, you handle pages." She marked sections that needed trimming and asked him to tighten the ending. Jalen revised between lesson plans and grading. He learned that editing was not punishment. It was craft. Each round made the book sound more like him. He held his posture steady and let it stand. Jalen maintained the pace unhurried, so the facts stayed clear. He moved on. Meanwhile, Camille kept stalling the divorce. She demanded mediation, then canceled at the last minute. Maxine responded with receipts, bank records, and emails where Camille mocked school events. The sharpest evidence came from the restaurant night. Darnell had recorded video for social media, and Camille's entire tirade was audible. Maxine said, "It won't be admissible, but it can change leverage." She sent it to Camille's attorney. 2 days later, a settlement offer arrived. He carried his breath quiet and let it stand. Jalen kept the facts clean, so the facts stayed clear. He moved on. He remained patient until he could think again. The offer was simple. Camille kept her assets, Jalen kept his. They split the security deposit, and there is no alimony. Maxine told him, "Take it." Jalen signed. 6 months after walking out of Mariner Blue, the divorce was final. He went to work the next day and taught as usual. After school, he helped a student understand symbols in The Great Gatsby, then went home and warmed leftovers. An email waited from an agent named Danica Fields. "I love it. Let's talk." He held the truth clear and said nothing more. Jalen maintained the pace unhurried and moved on. Spring brought a different rhythm. Jalen sat in Danica Fields' office in Manhattan, surrounded by shelves of novels with her clients' names. Danica said, "I sent your manuscript to 4 publishers." She tapped her notes. 3 responded quickly. Jalen asked, "Interesting how?" Danica smiled. "Auction," she said. "Your story is honest, literary, and readable. People want transformation that feels real." Jalen tried not to hope, but his hands trembled under the desk. He carried his focus grounded and let it stand. Jalen kept the boundary firm, so the facts stayed clear. He moved on. During the planning period 2 weeks later, Danica called. "We have a deal," she said. Pemberton Press offered a 2-book contract. She named the advance, and Jalen sat down slowly. The amount exceeded his annual salary. The money meant safety, but the deeper impact was validation. Camille's mockery had been wrong. Jalen went back to grading essays, not because he felt small, but because teaching still mattered to him. His students noticed he laughed more and spoke with ease. He held his tone measured and said nothing more. Jalen maintained the pace unhurried and moved on. Success created friction at school. At the spring gala, Principal Harold Simmons pulled him aside. "I heard you sold a novel," he said. "Congratulations." Parents are worried about content. Jalen asked, "What content?" The principal replied, "They heard it involves divorce and conflict." Jalen said, "It's fiction about resilience." The principal suggested a pen name to separate his work from his classroom. Jalen answered, "No." His refusal rippled. Some parents complained in emails. The board requested a meeting. Tasha organized support among staff. He held his posture steady and let it stand. Jalen kept the truth direct, so the moment stayed simple. He moved on. At the next faculty meeting, Tasha spoke before anyone could dodge the issue. She said, "Jalen is an excellent teacher. Writing a novel does not change his classroom record." Several colleagues nodded and added their own statements. Principal Simmons listened and took notes. Later, the school board requested a brief hearing. Jalen attended with Maxine's advice in mind. Stay factual, stay calm. He explained the book contained no students and no identifiable staff. He explained he followed district policy. He carried his breath quietly and let it stand. Jalen maintained the pace unhurried, so the facts stayed clear. He moved on. He remained grounded until the noise faded. The hearing did not end the noise, but it drew attention. A local reporter asked for an interview. Jalen agreed on the condition that the segment focus on creative freedom and teaching, not scandal. The reporter kept the promise. The broadcast showed Jalen in his classroom, then cut to him speaking about stories that help people name what hurts them. Danica said the coverage created interest without cheapening the work. Pre-orders rose. Camille's friends from the firm noticed and started texting each other about the book. Jalen kept his gaze steady and said nothing more. Jalen held the moment calm, so the facts stayed clear. He moved on. Local media picked up the dispute. A new segment called Jalen the Teacher Defending Creative Freedom. The attention created buzz for his debut novel, now titled Under Glass. Danica handled interviews carefully, refusing to turn it into a spectacle. The book's release date approached, and Jalen worked 2 lives, teaching by day, editing by night. His apartment walls are filled with plot notes and revision lists. He learned to protect quiet time, to say no, and to stop seeking permission for his work. He carried his focus grounded and let it stand. Jalen maintained the pace unhurried until the noise faded. He moved on. On a Tuesday in June, Camille called. Jalen stared at her name, the first contact in 8 months. He answered, partly to confirm it was real. Camille said, "I heard about your deal. Congratulations." Jalen replied, "Thank you." She paused, then asked, "Is the book about us?" Jalen said, "It's fiction, informed by experience." Camille said she had been thinking about the restaurant, that she was drunk and trying to impress people. Then she said, "I made a mistake." Her voice tightened. "Can we talk about another chance?" He held his tone measured and said nothing more. Jalen kept the boundary firm, so the facts stayed clear. He moved on. Jalen walked to the window and looked down at the street where Mr. Barnes tended small plants in reused containers. He spoke without anger. "You do not want me back," he said. "You want association with success." Camille protested. "That's not true." Jalen answered, 8 months ago, I was beneath you. Now I have a contract and attention, and suddenly I'm madder again." He paused. "You showed me conditional love. I will not live inside it." Camille said, "Please." Jalen replied, "I hope you find help, but not with me." He ended the call. He kept his gaze steady and let it stand. Jalen maintained the pace unhurried and moved on. After he ended the call, Jalen blocked Camille's number. The action felt like closing a door, not winning a fight. He did not text mutual friends to explain. He did not post anything online. He returned to his revision notes and to the next day's lesson plan. That night, he slept without checking his phone. In the morning, he woke up, brewed coffee, and wrote 2 clean pages before school. He did not feel triumphant. He felt protected, which was better. He carried his breath calmly and let it stand. Jalen kept the truth direct, so the moment stayed simple. He moved on. That weekend, Tasha hosted her birthday gathering on a balcony in Washington, D.C. Jalen arrived early to carry food and set up chairs. He met Dr. Naomi Sinclair, an emergency room physician wearing jeans and a vintage band shirt. Naomi asked, "What are you reading?" Jalen said, "My manuscript, Final Proofs." Naomi smiled. "So you're a writer," she said. Jalen corrected. "I'm a teacher who wrote a book." They talked for hours about books, medicine, fatigue, and the quiet satisfaction of helping people. Jalen listened and answered without performing. He carried his focus grounded and let it stand. Jalen maintained the pace unhurried, so the facts stayed clear. He moved on. When the party ended, Jalen walked Naomi to her car. Naomi said, "I work terrible hours and I miss texts." Jalen answered, "I can handle that." Naomi smiled. "Then I'd like to see you again," she said. Over the next months, they met between her shifts and his grading. They ate late dinners and took early walks. Naomi knew nothing about Camille's office world and did not care about it. She asked about his students and the pages he struggled to revise. Jalen felt excitement about the future, not fear of losing it. He kept his breath calm and let it stand. Jalen maintained the pace unhurried until the noise faded. He moved on. Under Glass launched on a clear September evening at an independent bookstore in Washington, D.C. Students, teachers, book club members, journalists, and Danica's industry contacts filled the room. Jalen stood at the microphone and said, "This book began as an ending." He read the opening pages about a man sitting in an expensive restaurant, realizing his spouse had become a stranger. The audience stayed still. When he finished, applause hit the walls. Naomi arrived straight from a double shift, still in scrubs, and met his eyes with a calm smile. Jalen saw Tasha in the front row, clapping hard. Mr. Barnes stood near the back in a suit he clearly saved for important days. He carried his focus grounded and let it stand. Jalen kept the truth direct and moved on. During the signing line, Aisha Lang appeared holding a copy. Jalen looked up, surprised. Aisha said, "I bought it, and I owe you an apology for that dinner." Jalen replied, "You don't have to." Aisha shook her head. "I do," she said. "We were not kind, and Camille was out of line." She leaned in and added, "Camille isn't doing well. The firm let her go months ago. Performance issues. Drinking at work. She calls mutual friends asking about you and about this book." Jalen felt sadness without satisfaction. He said, "I hope she gets help." He kept his gaze steady and let it stand. Jalen maintained the pace unhurried and moved on. Under Glass received strong reviews. A major newspaper called it an honest examination of marriage and the courage required to choose yourself. Book clubs adopted it, and the sales climbed steadily. Jalen received emails from readers who recognized their own lives in his pages. People wrote about being mocked for their jobs, their bodies, their dreams. People wrote about leaving toxic homes. Jalen replied when he could, short and direct. He did not gloat about Camille. He focused on work, on teaching, and on the people in front of him. He maintained his measured tone and let stand. Jalen kept the boundary firm, so the facts stayed clear. He moved on. One evening, Naomi cooked pasta in Jalen's apartment while he edited pages at the table. Naomi glanced at his notes and asked, "Are you writing about me?" Jalen answered, "I'm writing about what it's like to be with someone who lets me be myself." Naomi tasted the sauce and said, "If you use me, make me cooler. Give me a motorcycle or something." Jalen smiled. "You are an ER doctor," he said. "You're already cool." Naomi leaned in and kissed him, tasting like wine and tomatoes. Jalen felt safe, not evaluated. He held his breath calm and let it stand. Jalen maintained the pace unhurried and moved on. A year after Mariner Blue, Jalen attended Tasha's wedding in Annapolis and read a passage he wrote for the ceremony. Naomi watched from the front row with wet eyes. After the reception started, Jalen stepped outside for air and looked over the harbor. He thought about the restaurant night and the calm that followed. Rock bottom had been solid ground. His phone buzzed with a message from Danica about pre-orders trending and a celebrity book club requesting an interview. Jalen smiled, pocketed the phone, and stayed outside a few more minutes. He did not need to run inside to prove anything. He wanted to return when he was ready, not when approval demanded it. He kept his gaze steady and let it stand. Jalen maintained the pace unhurried and moved on. Back in his studio that night, Jalen opened his laptop and started a new file for a third book. He did not tell Danica yet. This one was not about humiliation or revenge. It was about ordinary work and small moments that change people. He typed scenes of a teacher helping a student understand a paragraph. He typed a colleague becoming family. He typed a landlord offering dinner without conditions. He typed an ER doctor coming home exhausted and still asking, "How was your day?" Jalen wrote what he could see and what he could state. He did not chase drama. He wrote choices, consequences, and quiet repairs. He held his posture steady and let it stand. Jalen maintained the pace unhurried until the noise faded. He moved on. At the reception, Naomi stepped onto the balcony beside him and tugged her sweater tighter. She said, "Tasha told me if I catch the bouquet, you are not allowed to panic." Jalen answered, "I won't panic." Naomi raised an eyebrow. "You look like someone who is doing math in his head," she said. Jalen replied, "I'm thinking about how fast life changes when you stop negotiating your dignity." Naomi touched his hand and said, "Then keep choosing yourself. The rest will follow." He watched the dance floor through the glass and felt steady. He kept his breath calm and let it stand. Jalen maintained the pace unhurried and moved on. Later, Jalen heard updates about Camille through a mutual acquaintance who worked in finance. Camille had moved to Chicago for a restart, and she had started therapy. The acquaintance said Camille attended an addiction support group after an incident at work. Jalen did not ask for details. He said, "I hope she gets help," and meant it. He did not miss her. He missed the version of their life that existed before contempt. That version was gone, knowing that let him stay kind without reopening the door. He kept his tone measured and let it stand. Jalen maintained the pace unhurried, so the facts stayed clear. He moved on. Aisha sent an email a week after the launch. She wrote that the dinner had embarrassed her, and that watching Jalen walk out planted a question she could not ignore. She added that she and Darnell separated soon after, and she was rebuilding on her own terms. Jalen replied with a short message, "I'm glad you're safe, and I hope you find peace." He did not present himself as a hero. He simply accepted that one honest boundary can ripple outward. The idea matched what he tried to teach students. Choices have consequences. He kept his gaze steady and let it stand. Jalen maintained the pace unhurried and moved on. Danica texted him on the first business day after the wedding. She wrote that Under Glass was holding steady, the second book's pre-orders were rising, and a well-known book club wanted to feature the novel. Jalen read the message, then placed the phone face down. He finished his lesson plan, answered 2 student emails, and packed his bag. He would share the news with Naomi later, not as a plea for approval, but as information. He liked that difference. His life no longer hinged on being impressive. He held his breath calm and let it stand. Jalen maintained the pace unhurried until the noise faded. He moved on. That night, Jalen returned to the third book and typed the last line of the opening section. He wrote about a teacher learning that worth is not assigned by a spouse, a salary, or a room full of strangers. He saved the file, shut the laptop, and looked around the studio that now felt like home. Naomi called to say she was leaving the hospital. Jalen said, "Drive safe," and meant it. The story that began with humiliation had turned into a record of choices, and he chose peace. Tomorrow he will teach, write, and carry love steadily. If this ending satisfies you, do 2 things. Like this video and subscribe for more real lifestyle stories where betrayal gets answered with consequences. Also comment "solid ground" if you believe walking away is sometimes the real win. Your comment tells me what story to post next. The end.